What if one conflict in the Middle East could affect the entire world? What if the decisions made between two countries could influence oil prices, global security, and the future of international politics?
Welcome back to Speak Better Daily, the channel where you improve your English through real conversations and learn about important topics happening around the world.
If you enjoy learning English while listening to professional discussions, make sure you subscribe and join our community.
Today, we are talking about one of the most complex and dangerous rivalries in modern history, Iran and the United States.
But this is not just a story about two countries that disagree. This is a story about history, power, religion, military strategy, nuclear ambitions, and the struggle for influence in the Middle East.
And the biggest question is this: how did two countries that were once close partners become some of the strongest opponents in the world?
What are Iran's goals? What is the United States trying to achieve? And is this conflict moving toward a larger war? Or can diplomacy still prevent a bigger crisis?
In this episode, we will break down the history, the current situation, the strategies of both sides, the role of Israel, the impact on the global economy, and what could happen next.
We will look at this conflict from different perspectives, because understanding the full picture means looking at both strengths and mistakes from all sides.
So stay with us as we explore the real story behind Iran versus the United States.
Let's begin.
David, before we talk about the current conflict, many people only see Iran and the United States as enemies today. But history tells a more complicated story. These two countries were once close partners. Can you explain how this relationship changed so dramatically? And what was the turning point that created this long rivalry?
That is the most important place to start, because the conflict between Iran and the United States did not begin with today's headlines. It is the result of decades of political changes, different interests, and deep disagreements. Many people are surprised to learn that Iran and the United States were not always opponents. During the rule of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Iran had a close relationship with Western countries, especially the United States. At that time, Iran was considered one of America's important allies in the Middle East. The relationship was based on several factors: Iran's strategic location, its energy resources, and its role in regional politics. However, inside Iran, there were growing frustrations among many people. Some believed that the monarchy gave too much power to the Shah and that Western influence was too strong in the country. These tensions eventually led to the Islamic Revolution in 1979. The revolution completely changed Iran's political system. The monarchy was removed, and a new Islamic republic was established under the leadership of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. This was a historic moment because Iran was no longer following the same political path as before. The new government rejected much of the Western influence that existed during the Shah's era, and relations with the United States quickly collapsed. For the United States, Iran went from being an important ally to becoming a major challenge in the Middle East. For Iran, however, many supporters of the revolution viewed the change as a movement for independence and a rejection of foreign control. The disagreement became deeper after events like the U.S. Embassy hostage crisis, economic sanctions, and years of political confrontation. So the rivalry between Iran and the United States is not simply about one event. It is a combination of history, ideology, security concerns, and competing visions for the Middle East. Sarah, many people hear the term Islamic Republic, but they do not fully understand what that means. How does Iran's political system work? And why is it so different from many other countries?
This is a very important question because the understanding Iran's government structure helps explain many of its decisions today. Iran is called the Islamic Republic because its political system combines elections with a powerful religious leadership structure. At the top of the system is the supreme leader. This position holds the highest authority in the country, especially on major issues such as foreign policy, military strategy, and national security. The supreme leader has influence over powerful institutions, including the military and security organizations. Iran also has a president who manages many government responsibilities, such as the economy and domestic policies. However, the president does not have the same level of authority as the supreme leader. Another important part of the system is that religious institutions play a major role in politics. The idea behind the system is that the country should be guided by Islamic principles. Supporters of this system argue that it protects Iran's independence and values. Critics argue that the system gives too much power to unelected religious leaders and limits political competition. This difference in political philosophy is one reason why Iran and Western countries often disagree. The United States generally promotes a different model of government. Iran follows a system where religion and politics are closely connected. So when Iran makes decisions about nuclear policy, regional influence, or relations with other countries, those decisions are not only strategic, they are also connected to the identity and ideology of the Islamic Republic. David, now that we understand the history and Iran's political system, let's talk about today. What is happening right now between Iran, the United States, and their allies? Why has this conflict become such a major international concern?
Today, the situation is one of the most serious tensions in the Middle East. The conflict is no longer only about diplomatic disagreements. It involves military power, regional alliances, economic pressure, and competition for influence. The United States continues to maintain a strong military presence in the region, with the goal of protecting its interests and supporting its allies. Iran, meanwhile, has developed its own strategy. Instead of depending only on traditional military power, Iran has built influence through regional partners and allied groups. One of the biggest factors in this conflict is Israel. The United States has a close relationship with Israel and provides strong support for its security. Iran, on the other hand, has been one of Israel's strongest opponents for decades. This has created a wider confrontation, involving not only Iran and the United States, but also other countries and groups across the region. Another major issue is Iran's nuclear program. Iran says its nuclear activities are for peaceful purposes, such as energy and research. However, the United States and many Western countries worry that Iran could eventually develop nuclear weapons capability. This disagreement has created years of sanctions, negotiations, and political pressure. The situation is also connected to the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important oil routes. Any serious disruption there could affect energy prices and the global economy. So the current conflict is not just about one battlefield. It is a complex competition involving military strength, economic power, alliances, and political influence. The biggest danger is that a small mistake or misunderstanding could turn a limited conflict into a much larger crisis.
David, when people look at the conflict between Iran and the United States, they often ask one important question. The United States has one of the strongest militaries in the world. So why has it not simply ended this conflict? What is the real strategy behind America's approach toward Iran?
That is a very important question because the United States strategy is not only about military power. It is a combination of military strength, economic pressure, diplomacy, and alliances. First, we have to understand that the United States does not see Iran only as a country with political disagreements. Washington views Iran as a major regional challenge because of its nuclear program, its missile capabilities, and its influence through allied groups in the Middle East. One major part of the American strategy has been economic pressure. For many years, the United States has used sanctions against Iran. These sanctions are designed to limit Iran's ability to generate income, especially from oil exports, and pressure the Iranian government to change some of its policies. Supporters of this strategy argue that sanctions are a way to avoid a larger war, while forcing negotiations. However, critics argue that sanctions can also hurt ordinary people and increase tensions between the two countries. The second part of the strategy is military deterrence. The United States maintains military bases and forces in the Middle East because it wants to protect its allies, secure international shipping routes, and show Iran that any major attack could bring a strong response. America's military advantage comes from advanced technology, aircraft carriers, intelligence systems, and a global network of alliances. But there is also a challenge. Military power does not always solve political problems. The United States learned this from previous conflicts in the Middle East, where defeating an enemy militarily did not always create long-term stability. Another important part of U.S. strategy is its relationship with regional allies, especially Israel and several Gulf countries. The United States believes that supporting these partners helps maintain regional security, but Iran sees American military presence and alliances differently. Iranian leaders often argue that the U.S. is trying to control the region and limit Iran's influence. So the conflict is not just about weapons. It is also about two different views of regional order. The United States wants a Middle East where its allies are protected and Iran's influence is limited. Iran wants a region where it has more independence and influence without American pressure. That difference is one of the main reasons this rivalry continues. Sarah, we know that Iran does not have the same military resources as the United States. So how has Iran managed to compete with a much stronger military power for so many years? What is Iran's strategy?
This is one of the most interesting parts of this conflict because Iran's strategy is very different from America's. Iran understands that it cannot compete with the United States in a traditional military war. The U.S. has a much larger defense budget, advanced aircraft, powerful navy, and advanced technology. Because of this difference, Iran has developed what experts often describe as an asymmetric strategy. This means Iran tries to use different methods instead of fighting directly in a traditional war. One important part of this strategy is building influence across the region through partnerships and allied groups. Iran has supported groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Shulis in Yemen, as well as other armed groups in Iraq and the region. Iran argues that these groups are part of a resistance network against foreign influence. However, the United States and some regional countries argue that Iran uses these groups to expand its power and create instability. Another part of Iran's strategy is missile and drone development. Iran has invested heavily in missiles because they allow Tehran to threaten opponents without needing a powerful air force, like the United States. Drones have also become an important tool because they are cheaper than traditional weapons and can create significant pressure. Iran's geography is another advantage. The country is large, mountainous, and difficult to invade. Any country considering military action against Iran must think about the possible cost and consequences. But Iran also faces serious challenges. Economic sanctions have damaged its economy. Inflation, unemployment, and limited international trade have created pressure inside the country. So Iran's strategy is based on survival, deterrence, and regional influence. It tries to make any attack against Iran extremely costly for its opponents. David, many analysts say that this is not only an Iran versus United States conflict. Israel has become one of the most important players. Why is Israel such a central part of this situation?
Israel is one of the key factors in understanding the entire conflict. The relationship between Israel and Iran has been hostile for decades. Iran does not recognize Israel's legitimacy and has supported groups that oppose Israel. Israel, meanwhile, views Iran's nuclear program, missile development, and regional alliances as major security threats. The United States has a very close relationship with Israel and considers Israel one of its most important allies in the Middle East. Because of this, any serious conflict between Iran and Israel can quickly involve the United States. One major concern for Israel is Iran's nuclear program. Israeli leaders have repeatedly said that they cannot allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon because they believe it would create an existential threat. Iran says its nuclear activities are peaceful and designed for energy and scientific purposes. This disagreement has created years of tension. Another important issue is Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is supported by Iran and has a long history of conflict with Israel. Israel sees Hezbollah's missiles and military capabilities as a major threat near its borders. Iran sees Hezbollah as part of its regional influence and deterrence strategy. So Israel's role is not separate from the Iran-USA rivalry. It is one of the main reasons Why the conflict has become more complicated and dangerous. Sarah, one of the biggest concerns in this conflict is the Strait of Hormuz. Why is this small waterway so important to the entire world?
The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically important locations on Earth. Although it is a narrow waterway, it is a major route for global energy supplies. A significant amount of the world's oil passes through this area every day. This means that any serious disruption could affect not only Middle Eastern countries but economies around the world. Iran has repeatedly shown that it has the ability to threaten shipping in the region. This does not necessarily mean Iran wants to completely close the Strait of Hormuz. BECAUSE, Iran itself depends on regional trade, but the ability to threaten this route gives Iran a powerful strategic tool. For the United States and its allies, protecting freedom of navigation is a major priority. A crisis in Hormuz could lead to higher oil prices, more expensive transportation, increased inflation, pressure on global markets. This is why countries far away from the Middle East pay close attention to this conflict. A military confrontation between Iran and the United States would not only affect soldiers and governments, it could affect ordinary people through the price of fuel, food, and transportation. And that is what makes this conflict a global issue, not only a regional one. David, when we talk about Iran's influence in the Middle East, many people focus only on the United States and Israel. But Iran also has a complicated relationship with Arab and Gulf countries. Can you explain why countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, and others are concerned about Iran's actions?
This is an important part of the story because the rivalry between Iran and its neighbors has existed for many years. And it is not only about religion or politics. It is also about power, security, and regional influence. Iran is one of the largest and most powerful countries in the Middle East. It has a large population, significant natural resources, and a long history in the region. Iran believes it has the right to play a major role in Middle Eastern affairs. However, some Arab Gulf countries see Iran's growing influence as a security challenge. Countries such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have often been concerned about Iran's missile programs, nuclear activities, and support for armed groups in the region. The competition between Iran and Saudi Arabia has been one of the biggest political rivalries in the Middle East. For many years, both countries competed for influence in places like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. Saudi Arabia has traditionally had strong relationships with the United States, while Iran has often positioned itself against American influence. Another important issue is Yemen. Iran has supported the Houthi movement in Yemen, while Saudi Arabia and its allies have opposed the Houthis. This conflict became part of the wider competition between Iran and Gulf countries. However, the situation is not always only confrontation. In recent years, there have also been diplomatic efforts between Iran and some Gulf countries to reduce tensions. This shows something important. Countries in the region may compete, but they also understand that a major war would harm everyone. So the relationship between Iran and Arab countries is complicated. There is competition, fear, and disagreement. But there is also a need for cooperation, because they share the same region.
David, one of the biggest issues between Iran and the United States is Iran's nuclear program. Why has this issue become such a major source of tension for so many years?
The nuclear issue is probably the central disagreement between Iran and Western countries. Iran says its nuclear program is peaceful and that it wants nuclear technology for energy, science, and civilian purposes. Iran argues that it has the same right as other countries to develop nuclear technology. However, the United States, Israel, and some Western countries have serious concerns. They worry that Iran could use its nuclear knowledge and materials to eventually develop nuclear weapons. This fear is based on the idea that if Iran became a nuclear power, it could completely change the balance of power in the Middle East. Israel, in particular, considers this a major security threat. Because of these concerns, Iran has faced years of international pressure and economic sanctions. There have been attempts to solve the issue through diplomacy, One important example was the 2015 nuclear agreement, where Iran accepted limits on its nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief. However, the agreement later faced major problems, especially after the United States withdrew from it. After that, tensions increased again. The difficult question is this: how can the world guarantee that Iran's nuclear program remains peaceful, while also respecting Iran's right to develop technology? This is the challenge that diplomats have struggled with for many years. A military solution could create more instability, but a diplomatic solution requires trust, which is very difficult between two sides that have decades of disagreement. Sarah, if a direct military conflict happened between Iran and the United States, many people ask, who would have the advantage? How do the military strengths and weaknesses of both sides compare?
This is a difficult question because military power is not only about the number of weapons, it is also about strategy, geography, alliances, and the ability to continue fighting. The United States has one of the most advanced militaries in the world. Its strengths include advanced aircraft, powerful navy, satellite intelligence, modern technology, global military bases, strong alliances. In a traditional military comparison, the United States has a significant advantage. However, Iran has developed a different type of defense strategy. Iran's strengths include large missile programs, drone capabilities, geographic advantages, regional partnerships, experience with asymmetric warfare. Iran understands that it cannot match America's military technology directly. Instead, it focuses on making any conflict expensive and difficult for its opponent. But both sides have weaknesses. The United States faces the challenge of fighting a long conflict far from home, which can be expensive politically and economically. Iran faces economic pressure, sanctions, and a military disadvantage compared with the United States. So the answer is not simple. The United States has greater military power, but Iran has developed methods to resist and create pressure. That is why many analysts believe that a direct war would be extremely dangerous and unpredictable for everyone involved. David, when people discuss conflicts like this, they often choose one side and blame only one country. But if we want to understand the reality, we have to look at the actions and mistakes of both sides. What mistakes have Iran and the United States made that increase tensions?
That is a very important question because international conflicts are rarely created by only one decision or one country. They usually develop through years of actions, reactions, and misunderstandings. Let's start with the United States. One criticism against the United States is its historical involvement in Iran's internal affairs. Many Iranians remember events from the past as evidence that America tried to influence Iranian politics. Critics also argue that decades of sanctions have created suffering for ordinary Iranian citizens and have made diplomatic relations more difficult. Another criticism is America's strong support for Israel. The United States views Israel as an important ally and believes supporting Israel is necessary for regional security. However, many people in the region argue that American support for Israel has increased tensions and made it harder to create balance in the Middle East. There is also criticism that military pressure does not always solve political problems. History has shown that military power can remove threats, but creating long-term peace is much more complicated. Now, looking at Iran's actions, there are also major criticisms. Iran has been accused by the United States and some regional countries of using armed groups to expand its influence. Groups supported by Iran, such as Hezbollah and the Houthis, have become major sources of concern for some governments. Critics argue that supporting these groups increases instability and creates more conflict in the region. Iran's nuclear activities have also created international concerns. Although Iran says its nuclear program is peaceful, some countries believe Iran has not provided enough confidence that it will never seek nuclear weapons. Iran's leaders also use strong language against countries like Israel and the United States, which many believe increases fear and mistrust. So when we look at the full picture, Both sides have contributed to the continuation of this rivalry. The United States believes it is protecting its interests and allies. Iran believes it is defending its independence and security. But the actions of both sides have created a cycle where each side sees itself as defensive and the other side as aggressive. Sarah, this is probably the question many people around the world are asking. If Iran and the United States continue this confrontation, who has the advantage? Who is actually winning this struggle?
This is one of the hardest questions because there is no simple answer. The truth is that both sides have different types of power. Let's start with the United States. America's biggest advantage is its military strength. The United States has advanced technology, a powerful navy, modern aircraft, intelligence capabilities, and strong international alliances. In a traditional military confrontation, the United States has a clear advantage. The American economy is also much larger, giving Washington more ability to support long-term operations. However, the United States also has weaknesses. A military victory does not always create political success. The cost of long conflicts can become extremely high, both financially and politically. Now, Iran's strengths are different. Iran has shown that it can survive under pressure. For decades, Iran has faced sanctions, isolation, and military threats, but it has continued to maintain its government and regional influence. Iran's missile program, drone capabilities, and partnerships with regional groups give it tools to pressure stronger opponents. Iran also benefits from geography. Its large territory and difficult landscape make any military campaign against it very challenging. But Iran has serious weaknesses as well. Its economy has been heavily affected by sanctions. Many citizens face economic difficulties, and the country struggles with limited international trade. So if we ask who is stronger militarily, the answer is the United States. But if we ask who can continue resisting pressure for a long time, Iran has shown significant ability. This conflict is not simply about defeating the other side. It is about influence, endurance, and the ability to shape the future of the region. David, looking ahead, what do you think happens next? Will this conflict become a larger war? Or is there still a possibility for diplomacy and a peaceful solution?
The future is uncertain, but there are several possible scenarios. The first possibility is a larger military conflict. This would be the most dangerous outcome because Iran, the United States, Israel, and regional countries all have powerful capabilities. A major war could affect not only the Middle East, but the global economy, especially because of energy markets and international trade. However, a full-scale war is also risky for every side. The United States understands that a long conflict could become expensive. Iran understands that a direct war with America could seriously damage its infrastructure and economy. Because of this, both sides may try to avoid a complete confrontation while continuing to compete through pressure and indirect actions. The second possibility is continued tension without a full war. This means more sanctions, political conflicts, cyber operations, regional competition, and limited military actions. Many analysts believe this type of competition could continue for years. The third possibility is diplomacy. Although Iran and the United States have deep disagreements, history shows that negotiations are possible when both sides believe compromise is necessary. The biggest challenge is trust. After decades of hostility, rebuilding confidence between the two countries would be extremely difficult. So the future depends on decisions made by leaders on all sides. One wrong decision could create a larger crisis, but careful diplomacy could prevent a disaster.